My beloved child, something changed today, and the person who noticed it first was not the one anyone expected. A special person who has been quietly watching the situation from a respectful distance finally decided they could no longer ignore one small detail involving a third party, because what happened did not look dramatic from the outside, yet it revealed something surprisingly important underneath. Don't skip this moment, because the warning was not meant to frighten you, control you, or convince you that something terrible is coming. It was much quieter than that. It sounded more like someone gently saying, "There is something you deserve to understand before you make another assumption." And strangely, the moment those words were spoken, the entire situation began to look different. You may have sensed recently that something around this connection felt slightly out of rhythm. Not broken. Not lost. Just different. Perhaps communication became less predictable. Perhaps the person on your heart seemed thoughtful one moment and distant the next. Perhaps you noticed tiny changes that were too small to confront yet too consistent to completely ignore. You tried to stay calm because you did not want to turn uncertainty into a story that had not been proven. That restraint matters more than you realize, because while you were choosing patience, someone else was beginning to notice where the confusion was actually coming from. And that is where today became unusual. The special person had seen the third party around before. Nothing about that alone seemed important. Conversations happened. Messages were exchanged. Ordinary moments passed. But today, one simple interaction exposed a pattern that had been hiding inside those ordinary moments. The third party said something that sounded harmless at first, almost casual, but there was a strange contradiction inside it. They claimed not to care about what was happening between you and this person, yet they seemed to know details they should not have been paying such close attention to. They remembered little things. Timing. Conversations. Changes in mood. Even the way your special person reacted whenever your name appeared unexpectedly. And the observer listening nearby suddenly wondered something they had never seriously considered before: why would someone who says they are unaffected be studying the connection so carefully? That question changed the atmosphere. Not because anyone accused anyone of anything, but because once a pattern becomes visible, it becomes difficult to pretend it was never there. Stay till the end, because the most meaningful part of this warning was not what the third party had done. It was what your person did after realizing someone else had noticed. They became quiet. Not defensive. Not angry. Just deeply quiet, the kind of silence that appears when someone hears another person describe something they themselves have been trying not to admit. And in that silence, one truth began rising above everything else: this connection has been occupying far more space in their heart than they have allowed anyone to see. Here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The special person did not tell them to choose you. They did not criticize the third party. They did not try to create conflict. Instead, they asked one gentle question: when did you start changing the way you act because you were worried about how someone else would react to your feelings? Your person did not answer immediately. That pause mattered. Because sometimes the questions that reach us most deeply are not the complicated ones. They are the questions we already know the answer to but have avoided saying aloud. Your person looked down, replaying moments nobody else could see. Times they almost reached out. Times they wrote something and erased it. Times they wanted to speak honestly but decided the timing was wrong. Times they wondered whether keeping peace around other people was slowly costing them peace inside themselves. And suddenly the warning was no longer really about the third party. It was about boundaries. About allowing outside opinions to become louder than inner clarity. About what happens when someone spends so much time trying not to disappoint everyone else that they begin disappointing themselves. Something important is waiting for you inside that realization, because you may have been interpreting their hesitation as a lack of feeling when the truth could be far more human. Sometimes people hesitate precisely because the feeling matters. They know that once they speak clearly, something has to change. A decision must become real. A boundary must become visible. A chapter that survived through ambiguity can no longer remain comfortably undefined. And today, someone finally held up a mirror to that hesitation. Then came the detail nobody expected. The third party returned to the conversation and asked your person a seemingly simple question about you. They expected a short answer. Maybe even a dismissive one. Instead, your person answered differently than they usually do. Their voice softened. Their entire energy changed. And the special person noticed immediately. No grand confession followed. No dramatic declaration. Just one honest sentence that revealed more than a speech ever could: I don't want them misunderstood because of choices I was afraid to make. Read that again within your heart. They did not blame you. They did not portray you as the reason things became complicated. They quietly accepted that some of the confusion came from their own hesitation. That is a significant emotional shift. And this was exactly why the special person felt you needed to be warned, not warned about danger, but warned not to misread silence as the whole story. Because silence can hide many things, and sometimes what it hides is not rejection. Sometimes it hides someone slowly finding the courage to stop letting other people define what they are allowed to feel. A strange calm followed. The third party did not know how to respond because the conversation had moved somewhere they could no longer easily influence. Your person had stopped explaining themselves. They had stopped defending every emotion. They were simply owning it. There is a quiet power in that. When someone no longer needs everyone around them to approve of what they feel, outside pressure begins losing its grip naturally. And something else happened in the minutes that followed. Your person picked up their phone. They opened something connected to you. Maybe an old conversation. Maybe a photograph. Maybe a message they had never answered properly. Whatever it was, they stayed there longer than expected. The special person noticed but said nothing. Some realizations need silence around them. What was your person thinking? Perhaps they were remembering the version of themselves who once believed they could keep postponing emotional honesty forever. Perhaps they were wondering how many misunderstandings had formed because they expected you to somehow understand words they never actually said. Perhaps they were finally recognizing that protecting a connection requires more than feeling something privately. Eventually, truth has to become behavior. And that thought stayed with them. Don't skip this softer part, because the story is not moving toward chaos. It is moving toward clarity. The third party may still have opinions. They may still feel uncomfortable with changes they cannot control. That does not automatically make them cruel or dangerous. Sometimes people interfere simply because they are afraid of losing their familiar place in someone's life. But another person's discomfort cannot permanently decide someone else's future. That was the lesson your person encountered today. And once they recognized it, something in them settled. The special person finally gave the warning they had been holding back: be careful that you don't let someone else's uncertainty become your own. Those words stayed in the room. They were not only meant for your person. In a way, they reach you too. Because you may have been carrying questions created by circumstances you did not cause. You may have wondered whether you needed to prove yourself more, become easier to understand, become quieter, more patient, more perfect. But meaningful connection is not built by performing until everyone approves. It is built when two people become honest enough to meet each other without a crowd standing emotionally between them. Your person is beginning to understand that. And here is the rare realization that made today different from all the days before: they realized the third party was not the biggest obstacle. Their own habit of avoiding uncomfortable conversations was. That recognition changes everything, because an outside influence can continue only while someone gives it authority. The moment that authority is questioned, the entire dynamic begins shifting. No confrontation is required. No dramatic ending. Just a clearer boundary and a more honest heart. Later, when your person was finally alone, they replayed the special person's warning again. But one particular part kept returning: if this person matters, stop making them guess what they mean to you. That sentence landed differently. Because your person suddenly imagined the situation from your side. They thought about how confusing their mixed signals may have felt. They remembered moments when you offered warmth and they responded cautiously. They remembered the distance they created while secretly hoping you would somehow see through it. And for the first time, instead of asking, "Why don't they understand me?" they asked, "Have I actually given them enough truth to understand?" That question opened something. A little regret, yes, but also possibility. Because what has not been communicated can still be communicated. What has been misunderstood can still be clarified. What has been delayed does not always have to remain unfinished. And this is why the special person wanted the warning to reach you gently: do not rush to write the ending of a story while someone is finally learning how to speak honestly inside it. At the same time, protect your peace. You do not need to chase clarity. You do not need to force anyone into a decision. Let actions become the evidence. Let consistency speak louder than emotional promises. If your person has truly understood what today revealed, you will not need endless explanations. You will begin noticing small but meaningful changes. A conversation handled differently. A boundary established without drama. A message that feels less guarded. An effort that does not disappear the moment outside opinions appear. Those are the signs that matter. And something quietly beautiful happened just before this day moved forward. Your person started writing a message. They stopped. Deleted part of it. Started again. For a moment it seemed they might abandon it completely, as they had done before. But this time they did not close the screen. They remained there, staring at a sentence they had been afraid to send because sending it would mean admitting that you mattered in a way they could no longer minimize. The special person was no longer around. The third party knew nothing about this moment. It belonged completely to your person and the truth they were finally facing. Their finger hovered over the screen. Then they added one final line. And that line is where everything becomes even more revealing, because it was not a declaration of perfect love, nor a promise about the future. It was something far more honest. Something they should perhaps have told you much earlier. And what happened immediately after they wrote it is the part nobody around them saw coming. The message was still unsent when something unexpected happened. Your person read that final line again, slowly this time, and instead of deleting it, they leaned back as if they had just heard their own truth spoken aloud for the first time. The sentence was simple: I should have protected this connection from confusion instead of expecting you to understand my silence. Nothing dramatic. Nothing designed to impress. Yet those words carried the weight of every moment they had stepped backward when they really wanted to step closer. And suddenly, the warning from that special person made complete sense. The third party had not created every problem. Some of the uncertainty had survived because your person kept leaving emotional doors half open, hoping everyone would remain comfortable. But today, comfort stopped feeling more important than honesty. Stay till the end, because what happened next revealed that the shift inside them was already becoming something more than a private realization. Their phone lit up with another message. It was from the third party. The timing was almost strange. Just as your person was preparing to communicate with you differently, another conversation appeared asking for their attention. The message itself was ordinary, but underneath it was a familiar pattern: questions about where they were, what they were thinking, why they had become quieter, whether something had changed. A few hours earlier, your person might have answered immediately, explaining everything just to prevent misunderstanding. This time, they stared at the screen and noticed something important. They had spent so long managing other people's reactions that they had forgotten to ask whether those reactions were theirs to manage at all. That realization created a pause. And in that pause, your person did something surprisingly mature. They did not argue. They did not accuse. They simply responded with less explanation than usual. Calmly. Respectfully. Clearly. A boundary disguised as an ordinary sentence: I'm taking some time to think about what I actually want. That was all. But the third party noticed the difference instantly. Because boundaries often sound quiet to the person setting them, yet they can feel enormous to someone accustomed to having constant access to another person's decisions. The response came quickly: is this because of them? Your name was not written, but both people knew who "them" meant. Your person looked at those words for a long moment. Something inside them wanted to avoid the question. Old habits suggested a safe answer. No, you're overthinking. Nothing is happening. Don't worry. They had used versions of those phrases before, not necessarily because they were true, but because they postponed uncomfortable conversations. Yet today had already exposed what postponement was costing. So instead of denying you, they wrote something different: this is because I need to stop pretending my feelings don't matter just because they make things complicated. And there it was. Not a rejection of anyone. Not an attack. Just ownership. Something important is waiting for you in that moment, because real emotional change often begins exactly this way, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a person finally using the word I honestly. I feel. I need. I want. I have been avoiding. I need to decide. Those words return responsibility to the person whose life it actually belongs to. The third party replied again, but your person did not rush this time. They set the phone down. For several minutes, they simply sat with what they had written. The silence around them was different from the silence you may have experienced before. This was not avoidance. This was integration. They were finally allowing their private feelings and public behavior to move toward the same direction. Can you feel how different that is? A person can care deeply and still behave inconsistently when they are afraid of consequences. But eventually, if the feeling is meaningful enough, inconsistency becomes exhausting. That exhaustion had reached your person today. They no longer wanted to keep one version of themselves around you and another version around everyone else. The distance between those two versions had become too wide. And the special person's warning had forced them to see it. Earlier that day, when the special person said, "Be careful who you allow to interpret your heart for you," your person had initially thought the statement was about the third party. Now they understood it was also about themselves. They had allowed fear, assumptions, other people's expectations, and imagined future problems to interpret feelings they had never examined directly. They kept asking, "What will happen if I admit this?" instead of asking the more important question, "What is already happening because I refuse to admit it?" That question hit harder. Because your person suddenly saw the consequences of silence. Your uncertainty. Their restlessness. The constant circle of almost conversations. The way small misunderstandings grew simply because nobody wanted to be the first one to speak plainly. They remembered one particular moment involving you, something small enough that you might not even know they remember it. Maybe you sent a thoughtful message when they were having a difficult day. Maybe you remembered a detail they had forgotten telling you. Maybe you gave them space without punishing them for needing it. Whatever that memory was, it returned now because it represented something they had been trying to explain away. Around you, they felt understood without having to perform. And that was precisely what made the connection frightening and precious at the same time. When someone sees us deeply, we can no longer hide comfortably behind the versions of ourselves everyone else accepts. Your person realized that perhaps they were not afraid of you. They were afraid of who they would have to become if they stopped hiding from what they felt around you. Don't skip this realization. It changes the meaning of the third party completely. The third party was not some mysterious force holding all the power. They were part of a larger emotional pattern your person had created by avoiding decisions. And once your person recognized that pattern, their attention shifted away from controlling the third party and toward becoming clearer themselves. That is where genuine progress begins. Not, "How do I make everyone approve?" but, "How do I become honest without becoming cruel?" Not, "How do I guarantee nothing changes?" but, "How do I stop sacrificing what matters simply because change feels uncomfortable?" Your person picked up the phone again. The unfinished message to you was still there. They reread it. Then, strangely, they removed the final line. Not because it was untrue, but because it still sounded too much like an explanation of the past. And your person suddenly understood that you did not need another explanation without direction. You needed clarity about what happens next. So they started writing again. There is something I have been unfairly expecting you to understand without telling you. They stopped there. Read it. Continued. I kept thinking silence was the safest choice, but I'm beginning to see that silence created its own kind of confusion. Another pause. Then something softer. You deserved clearer energy from me. Your person looked at the words and felt something shift in their chest. No promise. No fantasy. Just accountability. And perhaps that is more meaningful than all the dramatic words they could have written, because accountability is what turns emotion into trust. Then their screen changed again. A call came in. The special person who had warned them earlier. Your person almost ignored it, but something made them answer. There was no long introduction. The special person simply asked, "Did you think about what I said?" Your person laughed quietly, the tired kind of laugh that happens when someone has been thinking about nothing else. More than I wanted to, they admitted. The special person responded, "Good. Then don't make your next move because you're afraid of losing someone. Make it because you finally know what is true for you." That sentence settled deeply. There was wisdom in it. Fear can make people choose quickly, but clarity makes them choose consciously. Your person did not need to rush toward you simply because the third party had become uncomfortable. They did not need to prove anything. They needed to become certain that whatever they did next came from their own emotional truth. That distinction mattered. And this is why what happened today may be more important than any single message. Your person started separating love from pressure. Desire from obligation. Loyalty from people-pleasing. Care from fear. For perhaps the first time in a while, they were asking themselves what they would choose if nobody else were watching. The answer did not arrive loudly. It arrived through a memory of you. Your voice. Your patience. The way conversations with you sometimes continued in their mind long after they ended. The absence they noticed even when they tried not to. That quiet pull they had repeatedly dismissed as temporary, only to realize it kept returning. And then the special person asked another unexpected question. If this connection disappeared tomorrow, would you feel relieved or would you regret what you never said? Your person became completely silent. They knew. That was the problem. They knew immediately. The answer was regret. Not because they believed everything with you would be easy. Not because they had built some impossible fantasy of perfection. But because something unfinished between you had become too meaningful to abandon without honesty. Your person finally whispered, "I would always wonder what would have happened if I had just been brave enough to be clear." The special person did not celebrate. They did not push. They simply said, "Then clarity is your responsibility now." The call ended shortly afterward, but those words stayed behind. Clarity is your responsibility. Your person walked around the room holding that sentence in their thoughts. It changed the way they saw everything. They could no longer make the third party responsible for their indecision. They could no longer make timing responsible. They could no longer quietly make you responsible for somehow decoding them. If they wanted something, they had to express it. If they needed time, they had to communicate it. If they wanted a boundary with someone else, they had to create it. And if they cared about you, they had to stop hiding behind ambiguity. Meanwhile, the third party sent one final message: I feel like I'm losing my place. Your person read it differently now. Not as manipulation. Not automatically as wrongdoing. As vulnerability. For the first time, they could see that the third party might also be responding from fear. Fear of change. Fear of becoming less important. Fear that a familiar relationship was shifting. And recognizing that softened your person without weakening their boundary. They replied, you are not being erased. But I can't keep making choices only to make sure nobody feels uncomfortable. That sentence was important because your person was learning that compassion does not require self-abandonment. You can care about someone's feelings and still refuse to let those feelings dictate your life. You can respect a history without allowing history to control the future. You can be kind and still move forward. That understanding transformed the entire situation. What once felt like a triangle of pressure began becoming something simpler: 3 people, each responsible for their own emotions, with your person finally deciding to stop living as though every choice needed unanimous approval. And somewhere far from that conversation, perhaps you were going through your ordinary day without knowing any of this emotional rearranging was happening. That is the strange part, isn't it? Sometimes the moments that eventually change our relationships happen completely outside our awareness. Someone sits alone and finally understands what they have been avoiding. Someone chooses different words. Someone establishes one small boundary. Someone remembers us at the exact moment they are deciding who they want to become. And although we cannot see any of it yet, the effect eventually reaches us through behavior. That is what you should watch for: not hidden signs, not assumptions, but behavior. Because if today's realization is genuine, your person will begin showing you. Calmly. Consistently. Maybe imperfectly, but more clearly than before. The unsent message remained open. Your person returned to it one last time. They added a new sentence underneath everything else: I don't know exactly what the future looks like, but I know I don't want fear making my decisions anymore. And then they hesitated. Their thumb moved toward send. Stopped. Moved again. You might think the story depends on whether they sent it in that exact second. But strangely, that is not the biggest part. The biggest part is that this time, hesitation did not make them delete the truth. They saved it. They kept it. They allowed the words to exist. And just before they made the final decision about sending it, something happened that turned their attention toward you in an even deeper way. A forgotten conversation resurfaced: something you said a long time ago, perhaps casually, perhaps without realizing its importance. Your person suddenly understood that you had already warned them about this entire pattern without ever mentioning the third party at all. And the exact words they remembered now are about to explain why this connection has survived so much uncertainty.